All right, what's going on, everybody? Today I've got a special video for you. I'm going to be riding my hardtail for the month of May. Every ride I'm going to be doing is going to be on this beauty, this Common Sal Meta HT, and we're going to see if it makes me a better rider. Without further ado, let's kind of get into some trails.
So as my past self mentioned, the original plan was to ride a hardtail for just the month of May. However, due to some unforeseen circumstances surrounding different bike shops and having my coil on my full suspension getting serviced, that actually was pushed out to 2 months. So for all of the month of May and June, I was riding my Common Sal Meta HT. And I actually ended up doing a bike check video, so I'll post that in the link in the description. That'll go over the geometry, all of the different spec and build component of the bike that I've been riding. It's also important to note that if you're new to mountain biking, a hardtail means that there is just one suspension, and that's the fork on the bike. And so there's no extra linkage, there's no rear shock as in a coil or air. You're just going to have the front fork, and then you're going to have the frame. And so the only thing that's going to be absorbing the bumps is the fork and your legs. Throughout the past 2 months, there were 3 main ideas that I was focusing on to see if riding a hardtail actually made me a better rider. So the first one was, did riding my hardtail force me to choose a better line? The second is, did riding my hardtail get me better at cornering and pumping, or what I call finding the flow of the trail? And then 3, did riding my hardtail make me better and more confident at jumping? Let's dive into the first thing, and probably one of the most important, and that's choosing the better line. So throughout the 2 months, I definitely think that riding a hardtail forced me to choose a better line. So when I think of a better line, I think of the smoothest and quickest line to get down the feature as easily as possible. However, like I mentioned, because you only have the front suspension and then your body, like your legs, to soak up any sort of bumps, chatter, roots, rocks, any features like that, if I'm going down a 1,500-foot descent trail and I don't want to take a break, or I don't want to totally tire myself out, I need to make sure that I'm putting the bike in an area that's going to be smooth and quick to get down the feature without causing so much extra kind of feedback from the trail to, my body. So when I was riding, I consistently found myself thinking about this idea that I just need to put the bike in the smoothest line possible to make this feature as easy as possible, so my body's not just getting totally rattled. And then when I transferred back to a full suspension, that was still in my mindset. All of those lines that I had chosen in the trails that I normally ride, I still wanted to take them, and it just felt incredibly smooth after that. And so I think just having that idea kind of drilled into my brain from riding the hardtail and making it less of an insurance policy than if I had that idea with a full suspension definitely made me a quicker rider, at least feel like I'm quicker. I don't have the trail times to compare from my hardtail versus the full suspension, but again, just going off of feeling, because I cemented that idea in my brain that I have to choose a smoother line, and that was so at the forefront for 2 months, that now when I'm riding my full suspension, I'm thinking about that same thing, right? Sometimes I go off that and say, well, I want to choose a really, like I said, crazy line, or something that, I wouldn't normally do. It's maybe not be the smoothest to make things fun. But if I'm strictly looking at, I want to bust down this trail as quick as I can, oh yeah, I'm going to find the smoothest line. And I think a lot of that practice was just derived from the hardtail.
Yep. Oh, that was very wild on the hardtail.
All right, let's transition to point number 2, which was cornering and pumping, or finding the flow of the trail. So again, because I was riding a hardtail and I did not have suspension, I got all of the feedback from the trail. So in point number 1, choosing a better line, oftentimes that was referencing, a more technical trail that was really feature heavy. However, I also love riding flow trails, which are fast. They've got big solid berms, they've got some doubles, rollers, things like that. And a hardtail really does shine there because I'm feeling all of the feedback from the trail. So I know exactly what the bike is going to do based on how the trail looks, right? And so because of that, I felt that when I was cornering, I could trust my bike more because I didn't have an extra suspension that was going to do anything into the corner. I could look at the corner and I could just rail my bike into it, and I would know that my bike is going to respond based on how the corner is. So that's really where I found that the hardtail shined and where I enjoyed it the most. It wasn't on trying to get down the most technical features. It was surfing the blue flow trails. Like I thought that was just so fun. And so did that idea of, you know, cornering and pumping, finding the flow of the trail, how did that translate when I got back on my full suspension? And I think that the answer there was it was pretty much the same on the blue flow trails. I was still trying to do that, but that idea was kind of elevated on my full suspension when I started riding more black trails and double black trails that had just much more gnarly features and roots and rocks and jumps and drops and everything you can think of in a black and double black trail. I was looking at it from the lens of how can I surf this, but how can I get down it in a more flowy and fluid and fun way because of the time that I spent on the hardtail. So yep, I definitely think that I got better at cornering and pumping and finding the flow of the trails. And now moving on to the third point that I was really focused on for the past 2 months, and that was jumping. I think there's a reason why almost all BMX bikes and dirt jumpers are hardtails. For me, jumping is probably the weakest skill in my mountain biking arsenal, and so it's something that I'm going to continuously practice and improve on because it can be really fun when you get a good whip or get a good, you know, handlebar twisty. And just more confident when you go off a jump and you're not freezing in the air and you have confidence in your landing. I think spending time on my hardtail and going to those different places to practice jumping definitely helped. And it also helped that my hardtail is a pretty small bike compared to my full suspension. And so I was able to kind of get some, you know, handlebar twists, and I was able to kind of push the back end where I wanted it to be in the air. I wouldn't consider it really a full whip by any means, but it's definitely on the way to kind of moving the bike in the air and still being within control. So I think of just having the hardtail be a lighter bike and having it be more maneuverable in the air for me, I definitely think that has helped now that I'm back on my full suspension. And I have yet to experience, you know, knock on wood, I've yet to experience the full-on dead sailor, you know, thing that I had experienced in the past, where I'll jump up and then in the air I'll just kind of freeze and my handlebars will be turned. So I'm really just hoping that as soon as I land I can regain composure and control. That hasn't happened yet, so I think that's the biggest improvement. Granted, I can't fully say if that's because of the hardtail itself or because of just the time that I spent practicing jumping in general and getting more confident. But I can also say that on my full suspension now, I am pushing the back end a little bit different ways. I'm not just going off the jump direct head on. I am starting to, you know, consistently do some bike movement stuff, and so that's been really fun to get better at as well. So I think it's safe to say that my jumping has improved since I've been riding the hardtail for 2 months, and that has translated to my full suspension. And the last section of the video is other things that I learned from riding the hardtail for 2 months. The first thing is that the most important components on the hardtail are going to be your fork and your tires. So the fork is the first thing to absorb anything from the trail, so you need to make sure that's dialed. And what I mean by dialed is the proper compression settings, the proper rebound settings, the proper air pressure, and the proper amount of volume tokens or volume reducers for the kind of riding you're doing. The second component that you need to have dialed is the tires. Just make sure you have the proper air pressure in those tires so that you're, you know, getting the most traction you can, because your back end is going to be bouncing every which direction. And then also consider installing cush core in the rear to help with pinch flats, because again, if you're going off drops, jumps, and you end up casing anything, all of that, you know, pressure from the bike is basically going to go right to the tires and your legs. So not having the insurance policy of the rear suspension, you want to make sure that your tires are dialed. Another thing I learned from riding the hardtail is that they are very capable bikes. It may be a little bit more strenuous on your body, but they can do what a full suspension can do. Granted, you probably shouldn't take a hardtail to like Red Bull Hardline, for example, but for most of the trails that we're riding, a hardtail is just as capable. The very last thing that I've kind of learned, and it could be probably the most important, is two parts. Confidence is key, and it's not the bike but the rider. So I've been properly mountain biking for a year and 3 months, 4 months, I don't know, not a lot of time. And I've had a lot of different bikes in my time, just buying different new bikes and then selling those, buying used bikes. I've had a couple hardtails, I've had a couple full suspension bikes, I've had the 29er, 27.5. I've done a lot of different bike swapping, and I've really realized that in dedicating 2 months to riding a hardtail and growing my confidence, really focusing on those 3 categories that I listed earlier, it's not the bike but the rider. If you want to get better at this sport, you need to train. You need to think about, what are areas I can improve on? What are trails that I can practice, improving in those specific areas? And you need to start just building your confidence safely that way, as opposed to thinking, man, I want to get faster. That means I need a bigger bike. That means I need more suspension. I need a coil shock over an air shock. Oh, I need to get cush core. I need to get the carbon wheels. You don't need that to gain confidence and to have fun on the trail. Honestly, the best bike is the one you're having the most fun on. And I can confidently say that the past 2 months were quite fun and very enjoyable. So for the foreseeable future, I am probably going to be riding my full suspension because I am stoked to have that back, but this is definitely not the last of the pretty one. It's not the last of the hardtail content, but I am excited to kind of transition again back to the full suspension. And a full disclosure, I do have another full suspension bike that I'm really excited about and really stoked to show on the channel, and it might be a little controversial to some people out there, but I'm very excited about it and expect that to come. But thank you everyone for watching. I know it's a longer video, and if you sat through it this long, listened to my thoughts on the hardtail, then I super appreciate it. Leave your comments. I want to know if you're riding a hardtail full suspension, what you've kind of experienced. I'd love to just hear from the community, your thoughts as well. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one. And don't forget, the most important trail of the day is the next one.